In this video, we're going to break down the best and worst heroes for every single map in Overwatch. If you're curious exactly what heroes you should be playing on every single map and what strategies are the best, then this is the perfect video for you. But do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let's jump right into the video. Now, two things before we get started. Keep in mind that different stages of a map favor certain strategies and heroes. Oftentimes, different parts of the map will be further sightlines, closer sightlines, and as such will favor different types of heroes, so I'm going to talk about that and keep that in mind. There isn't one perfect character for an entire map, and two, different skill levels create different breakpoints in value. Just because a map is heavily Widow favored, if there's no one in the lobby that has the skill to utilize Widow to her effectiveness to shut down the lobby, then Widow is not gonna take over the lobby, thus a lot of other characters are gonna be viable. So keep these things in mind. Now, first off, let's talk about all the control maps, starting with Busan. And we have Downtown, Sanctuary, and Mecha Base. So Downtown is the one with the big buildings, and it's pretty far sightlines. Of course, this is a pretty par for the course Widow map. Widow is really, really dominant. And if you're not going to be rocking a Widow here, you most likely need Dive, some type of character like Ball, Doomfist, Hammond, something like that, so you can contest a Widowmaker on these high grounds. And honestly, Sanctuary is going to be pretty similar. A very Widow-dominated map where if you want to contest a Widowmaker, in this map in particular, Ball is probably going to be your best bet because of how far away the map is. It's hard to stage a dive. There isn't any close range angles where you can get to start a dive from. Ball's going to be the best at flying around the map, potentially getting health packs, so that's something that you should consider on this map in particular. Now, Mecha Base, things kind of dramatically change. The indoor map is quite a bit different, and this is actually going to favor Brawl a lot of the time. You can definitely play other compositions, of course, but Brawl's really, really good here, where a lot of the fights center around these little circular choke points on both sides of the high ground, or the other choke points that lead into the little high ground perch. This is typically a situation where Mei is really, really strong. Brawl characters, so characters like Rhine, characters like Zarya, even Junker Queen, a lot of these characters can work perfectly well on this map when they kind of struggle in the other map before. And Widow isn't nearly as powerful on this map as other maps as well, even though you could still play her. Now, talk about Ilios. For Lighthouse, I think a lot of things are viable. Pharah, Mercy is really, really good. Reaper's actually surprisingly good on this map, and ultimately, this map is pretty flexible. A lot of characters can see a lot of play on Lighthouse. I think in general, there is a multitude of compositions and strategies ranging from Brawl to Dive to different things, and that kind of just shows that the map is well balanced when a lot of things can work out. On Ruins, of course, Ruins is going to be Widowmaker centric. Widowmaker is basically the best thing to be doing. If you're not playing Widow, you should be playing some form of Dive so that you can contest Widowmakers. But the last thing that you want is having a composition that can't do anything to a Widowmaker sitting on the high ground, constantly shooting over your team. And then well is kind of good for a lot of things as well. I think many things can work. Pharah, Mercy's still good here. Dive can be really good. Reaper's still really good. And actually in Boops get extra value, of course, so something like Hog can legitimately work depending on the rank you're in, of course. But I actually play a lot of Hog, just randomly locking it on Well, because you can get a fair amount of value just hooking people into the Well, and you can take control of center really easily. On Lijiang Tower, we have Night Market. So on Night Market, there are quite a few characters that are good. Sim is actually decently good. Pharah, Mercy, Mei is good. Brawl, and just kind of flexible characters. Ramatra, there's a whole bunch of other characters that could be pretty good on Night Market. Pretty balanced map as well. For Garden in particular, Pharah, Mercy is amazing. And Doomfist is actually really good here. If people are playing bridges, you can knock them off. Any area around the map is really good for Doom. And then other dive characters that can kind of fit alongside that. For Control in particular, Brawl is typically your best bet on Lijiang Tower. Brawl is really, really good in the tight corridors, and you can definitely also play some closer range characters that kind of output a lot of damage. Characters like Junkrat are also really good. In general, Control is going to be more Brawl centric overall. Now, to talk about Nepal, first off, we do have to talk about Village, which is the little square village inside where like the map is a square and there's two sides of it. Mei is like one of the best characters for this map in particular because any enemies that come inside the box get walled off and they get trapped. Really, really strong, and characters that can play around that are really, really great. For Shrine, Sim is actually pretty strong because you can put Sim turrets all around the top side and you get a lot of value that way. And then Ramatra is a nice flexible tank that I think can play the different positions you need, because sometimes it's hard to get, if you lose a fight, to get in position to go into a brawl on point and get your team on point. But Ram can kind of play both sides, a poke and a brawl. poke from afar, brawl when you get to point, and it's nice, that flexibility. So yeah, I'm gonna say Ram is probably the best tank for this map, although there's a couple other options you could play. And then Sanctum is a weird map, like really weird, and this is where there's the middle section, there's the huge freaking hole on the side, and then there's the little high ground with the mega, right? This is like a pretty interesting map, but most of the time this is a battle for high ground, and you can't give up height. A lot of the time you're gonna want to contest high ground and then have one off-angling DPS take or apply point pressure, still contributing to the fight, but then taking point presence, which is a weird situation. But if your entire team goes to point, then the enemy team can take high ground and just shoot you from above, so you got to kind of keep that in mind. There's no cover on point, so yeah, you're gonna really need to contest that high ground, and typically you only want one person to go to point. Now for Oasis, we have City Center. City Center is gonna be mainly dive. Far can also work as well, but a lot of different dive characters are gonna be really good for City Center. Characters like Tracer, even characters like Sombra, stuff like that. For Gardens, Garden is gonna be another Far centric map, but I think Doom is actually particularly good here because on Gardens you can boot people off if they take the high ground. You can make people contest point, jump to the high ground really easily. Doom is flexible in that way. And then for University, this is a closer range map where Brawl is going to be favored. I think Junker Queen's really good on University, but you can play a lot of Brawl characters like Zarya and Ryan if you really want to. For Antarctica Peninsula, another control map, we have the boat Icebreaker, and this is going to be Brawl heavy typically, but Tracer is kind of good on all these maps, so Tracer's really good too. You could even play Tracer as secondary DPS in a Brawl, and I think it actually works fairly well. Now we do got to talk about Labs, and Labs is weirdly kind of like Sanctum. I know it doesn't have the big gap in the side, but there's a high ground on the left, and then there's like the normal ground on the right. And typically what you want to do is you want to have a off-angling DPS and then a character that can contest height. So something like Ram is fine, even a dive is okay, but the idea is that the bulk of your forces are one place, and then you have an off-angling DPS that does two things, simultaneously adds to the fight, and he doesn't do this right away, he does this eventually, but he adds to the fight while he puts pressure on points, because you can't leave and give up a whole bunch of pressure off the high ground, because if the enemy take high ground from you, you're just gonna get shot from the high ground. Next up, we have Sub-Level, which is the indoor map. Tracer's fantastic here. Hanzo's also a character that's really good here because you can take a really wide off angle and just take unlimited pot shots. You can wall climb a lot here, take the high ground, drop to the low ground. There's a lot you can do on this map. I think Hanzo's really good. And then Dive is just great in general. Winston, Diva are really great. Even Doom is really good here. So yeah, you have a lot of options as far as that's concerned. Now, we're moving on to escort maps. First off, we got Circuit Royale. This is going to be poke. So Circuit Royale, sniper map. It's going to be Sigma. It's going to be a lot of Zen. You're going to see Widowmakers pretty much every single time. Hanzos are really good. Sojourns are good. Mercy's fine. Bap's fine. So whatever's in a poke composition, you're going to see it here, and that's kind of par for the course. Now for Dorado, we have Monkey is really strong. On second, Widowmaker is fantastic, but first and third can be Brawl. Dorado's a weird one because that second point is so large. It's kind of the hardest point to push through. Such a wide sight line. Even Dive is hard to stage here. So Monkey can still be good just to take that high ground, but typically you're going to want a Widowmaker because it's really hard to challenge a Widowmaker from those angles that she's taking. And then like I said, first and third is really flexible. I think you can play a Brawl. I think you could play a dive, but that second in particular, really strong for Widowmaker. The next up, we do have Havana, and for Havana, first and third in particular are going to be really heavily poke composition with a sniper, right? Sigma, Widowmaker, Hanzo to help the snipe battle, Zen, these are the characters that are going to be great on these maps. But on second is all of a sudden a much more flexible spot. So you can even play like dive here. You can even play brawl here. Most of the time, people just stay poke because they carry the momentum from the first fight to the second one. But you can kind of play whatever you want on second point. Then on third, you would want to typically swap back to poke and Widowmaker. Now on Rialto is going to be Widowmaker's okay, Brawl is okay, Dive is okay. I think a lot of things can work on Rialto depending on the stage of the point. Pretty much everything kind of goes on Rialto. Pretty well balanced map that I think is capable of utilizing multiple characters and strategies. Next up is Shambali. I think for Shambali in particular, Ramatra is really good, but a flexible lineup works. Right now, there's a lot of different things that you can play on Shambali that I think work. You can play tight corners and play some type of brawly strategy. You can definitely poke with characters like Ramatra and Sigma, or you can even play dive on some stages of the map. It kind of depends on what your team's committing to, but I do think that Ramatra with like an Ana is kind of like the easiest way to play this map in my personal opinion. Watch point is going to be dive, like throughout the whole thing, dive. dive. Dive on first, dive on second, dive on third. Watch point is just all dive. Attack and defense, it's dive. There's too much high ground to not have the means to challenge the high ground. So Diva, Wrecking Ball is really, really good. Winston's great. Genji's actually good on watch point. It's probably one of his best maps because he can take the high ground on a whim. And if you're going to play a DPS that is not a dive character, something that can help the dive or something that can take height really easily is good. So even characters like Hanzo are okay on this map. Now, let's talk about Blizzard World. I think Blizzard World is another one of those balanced maps that it's flexible. A lot of compositions can work. Definitely dive is going to be the easiest to directly take height on different places. If you're on attack, you challenge from height to height and you take control of the high ground. If you're playing a non-dive comp, you have to make sure that you're routing to the high ground. Throughout second, you need to be taking height and you need to be getting enemies off the high ground before you collapse on top of them. You can't just be pushing underneath and have an Ana nading down on top of you, right? You have to clear them out first. As long as your pathing is good, I think that you can play a multitude of different strategies here. Eichenwald on first, it's going to be Brawl. Eichenwald is just super, super heavily favored on Brawl on first point. Close range corners, choke points, Brawl is really great. For second, it's almost needed to play a dive because there's the high ground that you need to contest. You want to directly challenge up there. Dive is kind of going to be the best thing to be doing on second. But then on third, it's back to Brawl. And characters like a Junkrat are really good on third attack, which is interesting. And a lot of characters that are good in a Brawl are really good on third. May's really good on third. So it's weird because Eichenwald goes almost Brawl, then dive, then Brawl as the favorable compositions, which is weird. But if you have a huge ultimate advantage going after first point, you can definitely route up top, try to take a fight up top, take an aggressive fight at the close-up choke points with ultimates to kind of snowball your advantage and maybe win that way. Of course, those two were hybrids. I forgot to mention that we're moving on to hybrids now. And continuing with hybrids, we have Hollywood. And for Hollywood, there's a lot of characters and a lot of comps that you could play. Now, for second, though, on second point, on the whole second of the map, dive is kind of king because there's this high ground. Widowmaker's also good here. First, anything goes. Second's dive. But on third, it's kind of more brawl-centric because it's closer range. So if you kind of understand, the general rule of thumb for a lot of these is super, super long range is going to be poke. High grounds that you can abuse is typically going to be dive. And close angles and close ranges are typically going to be brawl. And that's kind of true across the board as like a general rule of thumb. Now we do have to talk about King's Row. King's Row is a very brawl-heavy map. Rhine, Mei, or any other brawl, Zarya, Junker Queen, all these characters are really fantastic on King's Row. I do think that third is a little bit better for dive, though, because there's these high ground perches that a Hanzo or a Widow could hold on defense that are hard to contest if you're not playing a dive yourself. But for the most part, a very brawl-centric map. Now, for Midtown is actually going to be typically like characters that can get around that choke. That choke is really annoying. You go underneath the train, and enemies could hold up on the top right with like a Sigma, and it can be really annoying to get through. Characters that can wrap around to the left or go behind the enemy team and set up behind are really strong. So Wrecking Ball, Sombra, Tracer, really, really good on Midtown. Now, in order to counteract this on defense, you could rock an anti-dive strategy around Torb that I think is really strong as well. And it's kind of interesting how there's both a dive and an anti-dive that can both be played. Of course, on second, it's going to be a little bit more favored to dive, but you get the idea. Next off, we do got to talk about Numbani. Numbani's very dive-centric because the high ground, right? Once again, the same idea on first point, and on second, there is these huge high grounds that you can abuse. So what does that mean? That means that dive is king. But on third, no more high ground means that brawl all of a sudden becomes good. So Numbani first and second, you play a dive composition, you play something that has verticality, that can take verticality or challenge up top, and then on third, you can swap to a brawl, you can swap to a Rhine, you can swap to a Jungle Queen, you can swap to a Mei, a Cassidy, whatever the case may be. Now, we're going to move on to Paricio, and Paricio is going to be primarily a dive composition for attack, I think, but defense is going to be a bit flexible what you can play, mainly because the defense has such strong control of the high ground on both first point and second point. Very, very annoying to deal with, where they get to kind of play whatever they want. They can play hit scans, they can play whatever, and on attack, you need somewhere to challenge them. So you could definitely play a Widowmaker if you want to, try to get that sight lines, get those picks, or you could play a dive that takes the fight to them, because if you just go to point and the enemy team are above you on the high ground, they can just shoot down on you and you're just kind of done. You need to take the fight up to them. them. So yeah, it typically requires like one diver to go around the far right, someone to go through the window, jump directly on them, someone to go from underneath, and you're kind of doing like a little pincer dive attack onto them. Now, specifically, let's talk about Coliseo. For Coliseo, I think Brawl is really good. Widow with the dive is okay as well. Kind of flexible with what you can play here. Brawl is actually typically very, very strong though. But especially around that center point, I think Widow can dominate it a lot. Now, Esperanza is very specifically dive most of the time. I do think that Echo is like really, really strong on this map because you can do a lot of rooftop surfing. Probably one of her best maps, but snipers are okay, and dive is really, really good. Characters that can contest these high ground bridges are really nice, and being able to play around a lot of the little verticality that you have is nice on this map. But there are stages of this map that I think actually favor a Brawl, but it's typically like a few separate stages of the map that are hard to switch between dive and Brawl, because you go through one part of the map and it favors dive, the next part of the map favors Brawl, and it kind of gets a little confusing. Next off is New Queen Street. New Queen Street is typically Ball or Brawl, which is kind of interesting. Wrecking Ball is really, really good, or a Brawl composition that centers around something that can deal with Wrecking Ball. I think that Ramatra is typically really good and nice and flexible, but Junker Queen is actually the best Brawl character that is good against a Wrecking Ball, mainly because you can knife the ball. When the ball tries to roll away, you can pull him back. So Junker Queen is fantastic on maps that both Ball, like a dive, is good, and a Brawl is good. Junker Queen's like a safe bet, where Junker Queen is just able to shut down Ball, where characters like Zarya and Reinhardt sometimes feel useless up against the Ball. Junker Queen does not, and you get to play Brawl, but you get to deny Hamster, which is really, really nice. Now, this gives you a really overarching view of the best and worst heroes to play on every single map. Now, keep in mind, like I said, this is just a general guideline to follow. There's a lot of characters that are viable on a number of different maps, and this is typically going to be best paired with my composition guide that I made previously, either a video or 2 videos ago. So you can check that out in the links down below if you missed out, so that you fully understand exactly what characters go in each and every one of these compositions. Anyways, if you have any other questions, definitely let me know down below. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.